On a cold February evening in 2001, the streets of Detroit carried that uneasy silence, only broken by the distant hum of traffic and the occasional wail of a siren. It was the kind of night that seemed ordinary on the surface, yet one young woman's fate would etch it into the city's memory as anything but. Olivia Bennett, a bright 21-year-old with an infectious smile and a quiet determination, was last seen walking out of a friend's apartment near the eastern edge of downtown. She had promised to call her parents when she got home, but that call never came. From that moment, her story slipped into the shadows, leaving behind a trail of questions that even decades later remains unanswered. The timeline of her disappearance is both precise and maddeningly vague. At 10:13 p.m., a neighbor confirmed seeing Olivia leave the building. She was wearing a dark green jacket, jeans, and carrying a small black purse. By 10:27 p.m., her cell phone registered its last signal, pinging a tower less than 2 miles away. After that, digital silence. No further calls, no text messages, no trace of movement. Within minutes, it was as if the earth had swallowed her whole. What makes this vanishing even more unsettling is how quickly the normal became abnormal. Her parents, Margaret and Thomas Bennett, recalled that Olivia had been in good spirits earlier that day. She was preparing for a job interview at a publishing company, a dream opportunity she had spoken about for weeks. She wasn't the type to disappear without a word. She wasn't running from debts, wasn't involved in anything dangerous, and had no history of impulsive escapes. Yet the moment she stepped out into that February air, she vanished as though she had walked into another dimension. Witness accounts only complicated the picture. A man walking his dog swore he saw a young woman matching Olivia's description entering a silver sedan around 10:20 p.m., just blocks from where her phone signal ended. Another person, however, claimed to have seen her hurrying down an alley, glancing over her shoulder as though someone was following her. Both testimonies were taken seriously, yet both led to dead ends. The sedan was never found. The alley yielded nothing. For investigators, it was like chasing smoke. But perhaps the most chilling part of that night was not just her sudden disappearance, but the strange inconsistencies in the hours that followed. Friends who tried calling her phone in the early morning hours said they heard a faint click before the line went dead, as if someone had deliberately silenced the device. One even claimed they heard muffled voices before the connection ended. Police dismissed it as static, but to those who knew Olivia, it felt like something or someone was behind it. Detroit in 2001 was no stranger to crime. The city carried scars of economic decline, with neighborhoods where streetlights flickered out and abandoned buildings stood as silent witnesses to the struggles within. Yet Olivia's case did not fit neatly into the narrative of random violence. No body was found, no signs of robbery, no ransom demand, just an absence, a void that became more haunting with each passing day. As news of her disappearance spread, theories began to circulate. Some whispered that she had been abducted by someone she knew, someone who understood her routines and caught her off guard. Others believed she had accidentally stumbled into the wrong place at the wrong time, crossing paths with people who lived in the city's darker corners. There were even rumors of a more sinister pattern, that Olivia's disappearance was not an isolated event, but part of a series of vanishings stretching across the Midwest during that period. The FBI would later investigate possible links, but nothing concrete ever tied them together. Her family clung desperately to hope, organizing search parties, handing out flyers with her photograph, pleading on local news broadcasts for anyone to come forward. Yet the city, vast and unyielding, offered no answers. Every lead unraveled into nothing, every clue dissolved under scrutiny. The more people searched, the deeper the mystery became, as though Detroit itself was conspiring to keep it secret. Years later, those who still speak of Olivia often describe her disappearance as if it were a ghost story, one that hovers in the air but never reveals its ending. For her parents, the memory of that night is not just a haunting mystery, It is a wound that never healed. Margaret once described the moment she realized her daughter wasn't coming home as feeling like the air in the house had turned heavy, as though the walls themselves knew something terrible had happened. The night Olivia vanished has since become the foundation of a puzzle with no corner pieces, a story that resists resolution. The unanswered calls, the silver sedan, the alley sighting, the muffled voices on the other end of the line, each fragment could be the key, yet none unlocks the truth. And so, 2 decades later, people still ask, what happened in those silent minutes between Olivia stepping into the night and the world losing sight of her forever? Until the day answers surface, the night she disappeared remains not just a mystery, but a chilling reminder of how someone can be here one moment and gone the next, leaving only questions that echo through time. 3 days after Olivia's disappearance, a discovery jolted both investigators and her family with a mixture of dread and faint, fragile hope. Her car, a faded blue Toyota Corolla, was found in a neglected lot on the outskirts of Detroit. The lot was the kind of place that seemed to repel life, littered with broken glass, rusting scrap, and the faint smell of gasoline lingering in the air. Locals often referred to it as a dumping ground, not just for junk, but for secrets that no one wanted uncovered. It was here, among the husks of forgotten machinery and crumbling brick walls, that Olivia's vehicle appeared, parked neatly, as if she had placed it there herself. The scene was unsettling in its contradictions. The car's exterior showed no signs of forced entry. Its doors were unlocked, the windows intact, and the tires bore no evidence of being slashed or tampered with. Inside, however, lay the details that turned the car from a simple piece of evidence into an enduring enigma. Olivia's purse sat on the passenger seat, zipped and untouched, with her wallet, driver's license, and even cash still inside. Her cell phone, though powered off, rested in the cup holder. The keys dangled from the ignition as though she had only just stepped out for a moment and would return any second. Investigators were immediately puzzled. If robbery had been the motive, why leave behind items of value? If she had chosen to disappear voluntarily, why leave behind the essentials that one would need to survive away from home? The car seemed staged, meticulously arranged to mimic either an abrupt departure or a calculated setup. Yet no fingerprints beyond Olivia's were discovered inside, no footprints around the vehicle, no immediate clues pointing to who might have last been with her. Even more chilling was the strange detail found in the back seat. A single dark green scarf, not belonging to Olivia, lay crumpled as though it had been hastily discarded. Her family swore it was not hers. She had never owned such a scarf. To some, it was nothing more than an innocent item, perhaps left by a passenger at some point in the past. But to detectives, it became a haunting symbol of someone else's presence, someone who had been inside that car during her final hours. The scarf was tested for DNA, yet no usable profile was ever extracted. Like everything else in this case, it became another question without an answer. Neighbors around the lot offered vague, inconsistent recollections. One man said he saw the Toyota parked there on the very night Olivia vanished, though he couldn't recall the exact time. Another insisted it had only appeared 2 days later, when a heavy snowstorm dusted its hood with a thin white blanket. A third claimed they heard a car door slam in the middle of the night, followed by hurried footsteps crunching across the gravel. But none of these accounts aligned, and none brought investigators closer to clarity. The car's condition suggested it hadn't been driven far. The gas tank was half full, and the odometer showed no suspicious jumps in mileage. It was as though Olivia had parked it there, or had been forced to, and then simply ceased to exist. Police dogs were brought in to track her scent, but it faded within yards of the vehicle, dissolving into the chaos of the city. It was as though her presence evaporated into the Detroit night. For her family, the discovery of the car was a tormenting mix of relief and horror. Relief, because it proved she had not simply vanished into thin air. There was a trace, a tangible piece of her existence. Horror, because the car's eerie stillness suggested something terrible had already occurred. Margaret Bennett recalled standing before the Toyota, staring at the keys in the ignition and whispering, "Why didn't you come back for them, Olivia?" That question has never found an answer. Speculation swirled wildly in the weeks following the discovery. Some believed Olivia had been abducted, forced to drive to that lot before being taken elsewhere. Others thought the car was planted, deliberately positioned there to throw investigators off the real trail. A darker theory suggested that whoever was with her wanted to create the illusion of choice, that she had stepped out of the car willingly, keys left behind, and walked into her fate. Each theory had its believers, and each one deepened the confusion. One of the most baffling developments came when an anonymous letter arrived at the Bennett's home a month later. The note, written in blocky, uneven handwriting, read only, "The car was never meant to be found. Look closer." The police examined it for fingerprints and DNA, but like the scarf, it led nowhere. The letter sparked endless debates. Was it a cruel prank or a cryptic clue from someone with inside knowledge? Some even believed the author was taunting the family, playing a game of control from the shadows. Over the years, the car has become a grim artifact of Olivia's disappearance, a symbol of unanswered questions. It now sits in an evidence lot, gathering dust, its secrets locked not in steel or glass, but in the gaps of time that no investigation has been able to bridge. The purse, the cell phone, the scarf, the note, all pieces of a puzzle without a picture. For some, the car represents the last place Olivia was truly present. For others, it is nothing more than a decoy, a distraction designed to keep the truth forever hidden. 2 decades later, detectives still refer to the Corolla as the riddle on 4 wheels. And for her family, every thought of that car returns them to the same haunting image. Olivia stepping out into the cold night air, her life neatly folded into the vehicle behind her, and then walking away into silence, leaving a trail that ends in an abandoned lot where answers should have been found, but never were. In the days after Olivia's car was discovered, investigators turned their attention to the people who might have seen or heard something on the night she vanished. At first, it seemed promising. Several residents of Detroit's East Side came forward with statements, each offering small fragments of what could have been the truth. Yet, what began as a beacon of hope soon spiraled into one of the most baffling and unsettling chapters of the entire case. Witnesses who once spoke with conviction would later contradict themselves, withdraw their accounts, or refuse to speak altogether, leaving behind a trail of broken testimonies and whispered suspicions. The first and perhaps most compelling witness was a woman named Cynthia Harris, who lived just blocks from the lot where Olivia's Toyota was found. Cynthia told police she had seen a young woman matching Olivia's description walking quickly down her street around 10:30 p.m. On the night of February 17, 2001, the woman, she said, appeared frightened, looking over her shoulder as though someone was following her. Cynthia recalled hearing hurried footsteps behind the young woman, though she admitted she never saw the person who might have been pursuing her. At first, her statement seemed to align with the theory of abduction, but within weeks, Cynthia recanted. She told detectives she must have been mistaken, claiming the woman she saw might have been a neighbor instead. When pressed, she became agitated and refused to discuss it further. Then there was the man with the dog, Gerald Watkins. He insisted he had seen Olivia entering a silver sedan near Jefferson Avenue, not far from where her phone signal had gone dead. Gerald described the driver as a man in his 30s with short hair and a heavy build. He even remembered the partial plate number, something investigators clung to with urgency. Yet, strangely, Gerald later changed his story. In a follow-up interview, he said he couldn't be sure if it was Olivia, nor could he recall any plate details. He claimed stress had clouded his memory, but some detectives suspected something else: intimidation. The pattern deepened when a third witness, a local store clerk named Brian Mills, reported that a nervous-looking young woman came into his corner shop that same night, asking to use the payphone. He believed it was Olivia, though he admitted he had only seen her picture on the news after the fact. When detectives returned to question him again, Brian's demeanor had shifted. He denied ever making the statement, saying he never saw that girl. His sudden reversal was so abrupt that investigators wondered if someone had gotten to him in the meantime. The unsettling theme was clear. People who claimed to know something seemed to back away as soon as their accounts drew attention. Police files revealed multiple attempts to recontact witnesses who had gone silent, but doors went unanswered, phones disconnected, and messages ignored. It was as if the city itself had wrapped a cloak of silence around Olivia's fate. Rumors began to circulate in the neighborhood. Some said witnesses had been threatened by men tied to organized crime groups that still operated in the shadows of Detroit in the early 2000s. Others whispered that Olivia's disappearance had touched something larger, a secret people were too afraid to expose. Whether these rumors held any truth, no one could say, but they fueled an atmosphere of paranoia and dread that made cooperation nearly impossible. For Olivia's parents, this wall of silence was one of the most agonizing aspects of the investigation. Margaret Bennett often spoke of her frustration with people who seemed to know more than they would admit. In one television interview, she pleaded directly, "If you saw my daughter, if you heard anything that night, please, for God's sake, don't be afraid. She deserves the truth. We deserve the truth." But her plea was met with silence, or worse, more contradictions. Perhaps the most haunting development came nearly a year later, when an anonymous caller reached out to the Detroit Police Department. The voice on the line was described as low, trembling, and fearful. The caller claimed to know who had last been seen with Olivia. Before giving a name, however, the line suddenly went dead. Attempts to trace the call failed. Detectives waited, hoping the caller would reach out again, but the phone remained silent. That moment became yet another phantom clue, an echo of truth that slipped away before it could take form. As the years passed, whispers about the witnesses only grew more mysterious. Cynthia Harris moved out of Detroit within months of retracting her statement. Gerald Watkins reportedly told a friend that he wished he had never said anything to the police. And Brian Mills, the shop clerk, left his job abruptly and disappeared from public life altogether. Some saw these as coincidences, the natural movements of people in a city constantly in flux. Others were convinced these individuals had been silenced by fear, by threats, or by something even more sinister. The question that haunts investigators and the public alike is this: what did these witnesses see that night, and why were they so unwilling or unable to stand by their words? If Olivia had simply been another face in the crowd, mistaken for someone else, there would have been no reason for such sudden reversals. The very act of recanting so dramatically suggested a pressure that went far beyond personal doubt. 2 decades later, the testimonies that once held promise remain locked in a haze of uncertainty. Files contain names, addresses, and initial statements, but they read more like fragments of a ghost story than evidence in a criminal case. Each witness seemed to reach toward the truth, only to recoil at the last second, leaving investigators staring at empty space where answers should have been. The silence of the witnesses has become its own character in Olivia's story, an invisible presence that speaks volumes through its absence. It is a silence that feels orchestrated, unnatural, as though it was carefully cultivated to bury the truth deeper. And so, what might have been the strongest leads became yet another haunting question mark in a case already drowning in them. To this day, the city remembers not just Olivia's disappearance, but the strange, unsettling fact that those who might have seen the truth turned away, leaving behind echoes instead of answers. To understand Olivia's disappearance, some investigators argued one had to understand the Detroit she lived in during 2001. The city at that time was a place of stark contrasts. Gleaming skyscrapers downtown, masking neighborhoods riddled with decay, whole blocks of homes abandoned, factories silent after decades of decline. But beneath the surface, beyond the headlines of crime statistics and economic collapse, lay an even darker world. An underbelly of secrets, networks, and power struggles invisible to most but impossible to ignore once you stumbled across it. Some believe that Olivia, unknowingly or not, crossed into that shadow world on the night she vanished. Detroit's underworld in the early 2000s was a shifting landscape. Old crime families that once dominated with iron fists had splintered, leaving gaps filled by smaller, unpredictable groups. Street gangs, drug syndicates, and clandestine clubs all fought for control, not just of territory, but of silence. These were organizations that thrived in secrecy, and anyone who saw too much often disappeared without a trace. For those who whispered about Olivia, the theory that she had become entangled in this hidden network felt less like speculation and more like a chilling inevitability. There were whispers that Olivia, through her part-time job at a downtown cafe, had encountered people connected to this underworld. Some former co-workers recalled that she occasionally served men who arrived late at night in sleek black cars, men who never gave names but always tipped in cash, sometimes far too much for a simple coffee. One of her friends remembered Olivia once saying, half joking, that she didn't like the way those guys looked at her, as if they knew something about her she didn't. At the time, it was brushed off as nerves. After her disappearance, it became a sinister echo. Adding to the unease was a rumor that Olivia had recently been seen at an underground club, known only by word of mouth. The club, hidden behind a shuttered warehouse, was said to be a place where everything from drugs to information changed hands. Those who entered never spoke openly about it, but whispers suggested that police raids had tried and failed to shut it down multiple times. If Olivia had gone there, or had been taken there, it could explain why witnesses grew fearful, why stories shifted, and why silence swallowed the investigation whole. To admit to seeing her might have meant admitting to being there too, exposing oneself to dangers far beyond the scope of a police interview. Then came the darker theories, those that tied her disappearance to secrets not meant for public eyes. Some speculated that she had stumbled onto something, documents, conversations, or dealings that tied powerful figures to criminal enterprises. Detroit's history is littered with cases where individuals who asked too many questions suddenly moved away or were never seen again. Could Olivia, a young woman with no ties to that world, have become a liability simply by being in the wrong place at the wrong time? The Bennetts, desperate for answers, chased down these leads themselves when official investigations stalled. Thomas Bennett once drove into neighborhoods he had never dared enter before, knocking on doors, showing his daughter's picture, asking questions that made people shut their doors quickly. One man told him bluntly, "You don't want to keep asking. She got caught up in something bigger, leave it." That warning has haunted Thomas ever since. Even stranger were the cryptic messages the family received during the first year after Olivia vanished. One came in the form of a postcard, postmarked from Detroit, but containing no return address. It read simply, "She saw what she wasn't supposed to see." Another was a phone call, the voice distorted and mechanical, that told Margaret, "Don't look in the alleys, look in the rooms beneath." To this day, no one knows who sent them or what exactly they meant. Were they clues meant to guide the family toward hidden truths, or cruel games meant to deepen their torment? Detectives privately admitted that Detroit's criminal networks had likely played some role in silencing witnesses. People who might have seen Olivia in those final hours could have been too afraid to speak, knowing that crossing certain groups came with consequences worse than death. The scarf in her car, the anonymous note, The sudden reversals in witness testimony, all of it seemed to point toward invisible hands manipulating the narrative. Yet, with no concrete evidence, the case remained stagnant. Over the years, journalists who attempted to probe the theory of Olivia's connection to Detroit's underbelly often found themselves blocked as well. One investigative reporter who pursued the story claimed his notes were stolen from his car after he met with a source. Another received threatening emails warning him to stop digging where graves lie. Neither could ever prove a direct connection to Olivia's case, but both swore her disappearance was tied to forces far larger than a single missing person. For the public, the story of Olivia became less about one young woman and more about what her vanishing symbolized. The city's shadows swallowing another life, its secrets remaining untouchable. Detroit was a city where silence could mean survival, and those who knew something about Olivia seemed to have chosen silence every time. The underbelly of Detroit, with its whispers of hidden clubs, criminal ties, and powerful men who operated in the dark, remains a specter over her case. It is the kind of world most citizens never see, yet Olivia's story suggests she may have brushed against it in her final hours. If true, then her disappearance was not random, not a case of bad luck, but a carefully orchestrated erasure. And so the question lingers, gnawing at the edges of every theory. Did Olivia stumble onto something that Detroit's underworld could not allow to surface? Or was her presence simply inconvenient to people who knew how to make inconvenient things vanish forever? Whatever the truth, it remains buried in the city's shadows, another secret in a city built on them. For Olivia's family, the days after her disappearance stretched into weeks, and the weeks into months, each one gnawing at the fragile line between hope and despair. Margaret and Thomas Bennett had lived quiet lives before February of 2001. They were a middle-class family with modest routines, centered around their only daughter, whose ambitions and laughter filled their small home in the Detroit suburbs. After Olivia vanished, however, their home became something else entirely. A shrine to the missing, a command center of desperation, and a cage of unbearable silence. Every corner of the house carried her presence. Her bedroom remained untouched, with clothes folded neatly on her bed, as if she might walk in at any moment. Her photographs were plastered across the living room walls, alongside maps with pins and notes, each one an attempt to trace her final steps. Margaret would sit for hours on the couch, staring at the front door, convinced that the sound of a key turning in the lock would break the nightmare. Thomas, on the other hand, grew restless, turning his grief into a relentless search, combing through neighborhoods, knocking on doors, chasing rumors. Where Margaret clung to hope, Thomas wrestled with anger, each of them embodying two sides of the same wound. But their determination came at a cost. The Bennetts began receiving strange, unnerving communications in the months after Olivia vanished. At first, it was anonymous phone calls, brief, chilling silences, followed by the sound of breathing before the caller hung up. Sometimes Margaret swore she heard faint voices in the background, though she could never make out the words. Then came the letters, crude scrawls on cheap paper. One read, "She's closer than you think." But another, even more disturbing, said, "Stop digging or you'll join her." Police investigated, but could never trace the origins. To the Bennetts, it was impossible to know whether these were cruel pranks or the voice of someone who truly knew where Olivia had gone. Family friends urged them to pull back, to let the police handle it, but the Bennetts could not rest. Margaret began appearing on local television, pleading for information, her voice trembling but unyielding. Thomas organized search parties, leading volunteers into abandoned buildings, alleys, and vacant lots. Each time, they returned with nothing but exhaustion and heavier hearts. The more they pushed, the more they felt invisible eyes watching them. Thomas once said he noticed a car parked near their house several nights in a row, its headlights off, its driver never stepping out. When he approached, the car sped away into the darkness. Inside the family, the strain grew unbearable. Margaret's refusal to give up hope clashed with Thomas's growing certainty that Olivia was gone. He confessed to friends that he sometimes envied those who could mourn openly rather than live in the torment of not knowing. "Hope," he once said, "is the cruelest prison." Margaret, however, clung to every sign, every anonymous call, every rumor, every whispered suggestion that Olivia had been seen alive somewhere. To her, even the cruel letters hinted that her daughter might still breathe, somewhere in the shadows. Their torment was not confined to the home. At public vigils, strangers would approach them with cryptic remarks. One man whispered into Margaret's ear, "I saw her," before disappearing into the crowd. Another handed Thomas a folded napkin with an address scrawled on it. When he visited, the building was empty. Each encounter added to the uncertainty, feeding a cycle of hope and despair that never resolved. Extended family members, once supportive, began to fracture under the weight of the ordeal. Some accused the Bennets of chasing ghosts, of allowing obsession to consume them. Others believed Olivia was still alive but hidden, perhaps even willingly. At Thanksgiving that year, Margaret's sister suggested gently but firmly that it might be time to accept the worst. Margaret erupted, accusing her of betrayal, of trying to bury Olivia while she might still be saved. That was the last holiday the family spent together, without tension simmering beneath every word. As the years dragged on, the Bennets' lives became defined by the disappearance. Their marriage, once a solid partnership, bent under the pressure. Some nights Thomas would retreat to the garage, sitting alone with stacks of files and maps, unable to sleep. Margaret, meanwhile, immersed herself in prayer groups and support circles for families of the missing. Together they still loved, but separately they grieved. And yet, even as time moved forward, the cruel dance of hope and fear continued. Every knock on the door sparked a jolt of anticipation. Every late-night phone call set their hearts racing. Sometimes it was only a delivery, sometimes a wrong number, but the possibility was always there, that Olivia might somehow reach out. That fragile possibility, however painful, was all that kept them moving. 2 decades later, the Bennets remain suspended between two worlds, one where their daughter is alive, held somewhere beyond their reach, and another where she is gone, her body lost to the city's shadows. They are neither grieving parents nor relieved survivors. They are trapped in the purgatory of the missing, where time does not heal, but only sharpens the wound. The cruelest part of Olivia's case is not just the absence of answers, but the torment of fragments, clues, rumors, and half-truths that keep her family dangling on the edge of hope. For Margaret and Thomas, hope has been both their lifeline and their tormentor, keeping them alive while slowly tearing them apart. And in that space between hope and fear, their lives have become as much a mystery as Olivia's disappearance itself. 2 decades have passed since Olivia vanished into the night, yet her absence continues to linger over Detroit like a fog that refuses to lift. Time may have weathered the edges of memory, but the case has never grown cold in the hearts of those who followed it. Every year, new whispers rise, rumors of sightings, theories born from fragments of evidence, confessions that unravel into nothing. The story of Olivia has become more than a missing persons case. It has become a haunting legend, a question etched into the city's history that no one has been able to answer. By the early 2010s, the disappearance had taken on a second life, amplified by the digital age. Online forums, true crime blogs, and amateur investigators picked apart every scrap of information, every inconsistency in the timeline, every mysterious phone call and letter the family received. Some believed Olivia had been taken by a local gang, silenced for knowing too much. Others were convinced she had been swept into human trafficking networks, her life swallowed by a shadow economy that thrived in the cracks of Detroit's underworld. And then, there were those who clung to the hope that she had run away voluntarily, choosing to reinvent herself in another city, another state, maybe even another country. The theories multiplied, each one adding new layers of intrigue, but none ever leading to proof. Detectives who had worked the case long since retired, but the file was never closed. It sits in the archives of the Detroit Police Department, thick with reports, photos, and witness statements that seem to contradict each other at every turn. New investigators occasionally revisit it, but each attempt ends the same way, with questions outnumbering answers. The evidence, Olivia's abandoned car, the mysterious phone calls, the anonymous letter, remains as ambiguous today as it was in 2001. Nothing leads to a definitive conclusion. The silence around Olivia is both maddening and magnetic, drawing new eyes to her story even as it resists resolution. Over the years, there have been moments when the case seemed on the verge of breaking open. In 2015, a woman was spotted in a small Michigan town who bore a striking resemblance to age-progressed photos of Olivia. Witnesses swore it was her, describing her as disoriented, glancing over her shoulder as though she was being followed. When investigators arrived, the woman had vanished, leaving no trace. In 2018, human remains were discovered in an abandoned building not far from where Olivia's car had once been found. For a brief, heart-wrenching moment, it seemed the mystery might finally have an ending. But DNA results revealed the remains belonged to someone else, another unidentified victim of Detroit's darker corners. Even in the present day, the case surfaces in unexpected ways. Documentaries and podcasts have kept Olivia's name alive, exploring her story with haunting detail. Each production breathes life back into the case, sparking new leads, new calls to law enforcement, new faces claiming to know something, yet the cycle always repeats. Promises of answers collapse into silence, and the family is left staring once again into the abyss of not knowing. For Olivia's family, the passage of time has not dulled the ache. Her mother, now older but no less determined, still lights a candle every year on the anniversary of her disappearance. Her father, though his health has declined, still insists on answering every anonymous call, clinging to the hope that one day the voice on the other end will finally give them the truth. Her siblings, now adults with families of their own, continue the vigil, telling Olivia's story to their children so her name will never fade. They live suspended between two worlds, one where Olivia is alive, waiting to be found, and another where she is gone, but cannot be mourned without certainty. The haunting nature of Olivia's case lies not only in what is known, but in what is missing. A young woman vanished, her car left behind, with her belongings untouched, as if frozen in time. Clues appeared like phantoms. The phone calls, the letter, the midnight knocks on the door, but none were ever enough to pierce the veil. Witnesses contradicted themselves, evidence evaporated, and the trail turned cold before it ever had the chance to burn. It is a story that refuses to close because it never had the chance to fully open. Now, more than 20 years later, Olivia's absence has become part of Detroit's fabric. Ask about her in certain neighborhoods, and people will still lower their voices, telling you they remember the girl on the flyers, the girl who disappeared without a trace. Some say she is buried beneath the city in places no one dares to search. Others believe she escaped, changed her name, and walks among us, unrecognized, carrying her secrets in silence. The truth remains locked away, hidden behind walls that no one has yet managed to break down. The mystery of Olivia endures because it refuses to obey time. It is not just about a single missing girl. It is about the chilling realization that some stories never end, that some questions echo endlessly, defying answers. 2 decades later, her case is a testament to the power of the unknown, a reminder that the shadows of the past never truly release their grip. And so, the question lingers, as sharp and unrelenting as it was on that night in 2001. What really happened to Olivia? Until that answer is found, Detroit will continue to carry her ghost, and her family will continue to wait, torn between hope and fear, for a truth that may never come. If Olivia's story left you questioning what really hides in the shadows, you're not alone. Some mysteries never die, and we'll keep uncovering them piece by piece. Don't let this case fade into silence. Subscribe, hit the notification bell, and join us as we dive into more chilling, unsolved stories. Your voice matters. Share your theories in the comments below, because sometimes the truth emerges where we least expect it.